Picture this: Rome, 39 CE. Not the Rome of postcards and marble statues. This is Rome at the height of its brutality, where a single man's whim can snap the spine of an entire empire. You're seated at an imperial banquet, the kind that drips with luxury. Soft lyre music drifts through the air. Slaves glide past with silver pitchers of wine. Senators laugh too loudly at jokes that aren't funny. And beside you sits your wife, dressed in her finest stola, doing everything she can to look serene. Then the emperor rises. Caligula. In an instant, the room freezes. You hear nothing. No music, no chatter, just the pounding of your own heart. With a pleasant smile that doesn't reach his eyes, he gestures toward your wife. She comes with me. Before you can comprehend what's happening, guards sweep in like shadows and pull her away. She screams your name, reaching for you. And you, one of the most powerful men in the world, cannot move a muscle. Because you know that if you protest, if you even tense your jaw in disapproval, your head could roll on the marble floor before her footsteps fade down the hallway. What follows is a half hour of pure psychological torment. Behind the curtain, every cruel sound, every cry, every mocking laugh cuts into you like a blade. When your wife finally returns, her eyes are hollow. The emperor strolls in moments later, adjusts his tunic, and sits across from you. And then, casually, he describes exactly what he just did, in front of every senator, in front of you, as if recounting a hunting trip. And the other senators? They look away. They stare at their plates. No one comes to your defense, because they know what you now know. Next time, it could be them. This isn't fiction. This isn't a twisted screenplay. Roman historians recorded these scenes, grim, surreal, unforgettable. And the emperor responsible wasn't just cruel, he engineered humiliation the way a mathematician engineers equations. To Caligula, power wasn't merely a tool. It was a stage, a spectacle, a weapon sharpened with shame. He wasn't satisfied with controlling Rome. He wanted to unmake the very meaning of dignity. Today, we step inside the shadows of his world, not the sanitized version in history textbooks, but the ritualistic horrors Rome later tried to erase. These are the 7 darkest practices of an emperor whose name became a curse whispered across centuries. Because Caligula's madness wasn't madness at all. It was intentional, methodical, and devastatingly effective. If you want to understand the depth of his depravity, you must start with the foundation beneath it: absolute power. Imagine Rome in 37 CE, the beating heart of an empire that stretched across continents. 60 million people lived and died under its banner, and at the apex of that colossal machine stood a young man barely 24 years old, Gaius Caesar, nicknamed Caligula. He was adored when he ascended to the throne, the son of a beloved general, the survivor of palace conspiracies, the golden boy who seemed destined to restore Rome's glory. Crowds cheered his name, temples offered prayers in his honor. The Senate declared a new era of hope. But anyone who truly knew Rome understood something deeper. Power wasn't granted to emperors, it swallowed them whole. Caligula had grown up watching the silent terror that ruled the imperial palace. He saw how Tiberius governed from his island refuge, where whispers spread of orgies and executions behind closed doors. He watched his uncle Claudius mocked publicly, humiliated simply for speaking with a stutter. And through all these experiences, Caligula absorbed a single devastating truth. In Rome, humiliation wasn't just painful, it was fatal. A Roman's entire existence revolved around dignitas, honor, reputation, and the legacy of one's lineage. To take a man's life was ordinary. To take his honor was annihilation. Caligula understood this better than any emperor before or after him. And so he built a system, a perfectly engineered machine designed to crush Rome's elite without ever raising a sword. If you protested, you died. If you stayed silent, you lived, but with the knowledge that you had abandoned your honor forever. A trap from which no one could escape. Roman historian Suetonius, who had direct access to imperial archives, recorded that Caligula staged these humiliation banquets at least 40 times in just 4 years. That means roughly once a month, senators gathered not for political strategy, but for ritualized degradation. More than 200 noble families were shattered, not by war, not by scandal, but by psychological warfare crafted by their emperor. Caligula had weaponized silence itself. Because how could a senator report an atrocity he had quietly witnessed? To speak up meant admitting he had done nothing. To stay silent meant protecting the very system destroying him. Every senator became complicit. Every man's shame became Caligula's leash. The emperor had found a way to rule Rome not through threats, but through shame so suffocating that even the most respected statesmen bowed to him like trembling slaves. And this was only the first layer of his cruelty. Think about how many stories were buried, how many victims erased because those who lived through this age preferred oblivion over remembrance. We know only fragments, only what managed to escape destruction, which means the true extent of Caligula's horrors might be far worse than anything written in ancient ink. Because what comes next dives deeper into the darkest corners of his rule. And once you enter those shadows, there's no returning to the Rome you thought you knew. Caligula's reign is remembered as one of the most troubling and unpredictable periods in Roman history. According to ancient writers, especially Cassius, who had access to official records, the emperor often used his authority not just to govern, but to intimidate and humiliate members of Rome's elite. While historians still debate the accuracy of these accounts, they provide a picture of the tense political atmosphere of the time. Several reports describe how Caligula targeted families whenever he felt offended, sometimes over a minor disagreement in the Senate, sometimes over a perceived slight, and sometimes simply because he was in an unstable mood. Once a family fell under his scrutiny, they had little power to resist. Declining an imperial order was almost unthinkable. Historical accounts mention that Caligula occasionally summoned young members of noble families to the palace under the pretext of imperial service. These situations placed tremendous psychological pressure on both the individuals involved and their families, who were expected to comply without question. Refusal was interpreted as disloyalty, and disloyalty brought severe consequences. During evening gatherings attended by Rome's upper class, Caligula often staged events designed to reinforce his dominance. Participation was not optional, and silence was expected. The purpose of these gatherings, according to the ancient sources, was not entertainment in the traditional sense, but a demonstration of absolute imperial power. One example recorded by Cassius describes a 15-year-old noble girl mentioned in an administrative tablet discovered in Pompeii. The document notes that she was taken into imperial custody and later returned to her family only a few days afterward. Although the record is brief, later historians suggest that the family withdrew her from public life due to the social stigma associated with being singled out by the emperor. In Roman society, where honor and reputation were paramount, such incidents left lasting scars. Many families attempted to protect their daughters through marriage, but ancient accounts claim that Caligula sometimes avoided marriages by decree, reinforcing the idea that no legal or social barrier could stand between the emperor and his will. Whether every detail reported by ancient writers is factual or exaggerated, these stories illustrate a broader truth. Caligula's rule instilled widespread fear. His unpredictable decisions reminded Rome's aristocracy that traditions, laws, and even family honor could be overturned at a moment's notice. This climate of uncertainty and intimidation is believed to have played a major role in the growing unrest that eventually led to his assassination.
Suetonius describes how Caligula forced senators, men born into privilege, wealth, and political power, to fight as gladiators, not trained for battle, not armored, often armed with nothing more than a wooden club. They were thrown into the sand to face starved animals or even each other. But the most perverse part wasn't the violence, it was the audience. Caligula forced senators' wives and daughters to sit in the front row. They were not allowed to look away. Their husbands, fathers, and sons fought for survival while they watched, powerless. And if a woman dared close her eyes or avert her gaze, guards dragged her into the arena as punishment. One infamous account details Senator Quintus Pomponius thrown into combat against a starving leopard. His wife, Julia, was seated directly across from him, 8 months pregnant. The fight lasted 11 brutal minutes before the leopard tore out his throat. That night, Julia went into premature labor. Neither she nor the child survived. Caligula didn't attend the funeral, but he did seize their property. Cruelty was not an accident of his rule, it was policy. Because for Caligula, humiliation wasn't a byproduct, it was the point. And as twisted as these rituals were, Caligula devised something even darker, a perversion of worship itself. After declaring himself a living god, he built a temple dedicated to himself. A golden statue of Caligula stood inside, towering and radiant. But the temple's most shocking feature wasn't the statue, it was the priestesses. He appointed senators' wives as his temple priestesses. These were not young servants. These were women who once held some of the highest social status in Rome. The emperor forced them to perform sacred rites with male worshippers and ceremonies that blurred the line between religion and degradation. Donations to the temple, generous gifts meant to flatter the emperor, earned certain worshippers time with these priestesses. Caligula insisted it was divine service. To refuse was sacrilege, and sacrilege meant death. Caligula had found a way to turn Rome's most noble matrons into instruments of worship, their dignity shredded under the guise of holiness. But still, he wasn't finished. One of his favorite spectacles was the crawling game. During lavish banquets, he would clap his hands, signaling the beginning of the ritual. Doors locked, guards sealed the exits. The command was simple. Every senator had to crawl across the floor to the emperor like a dog. The last one to arrive was executed. Imagine the scene. Senators in your 60s, war heroes, men who once commanded armies, crawling across marble floors, pushing each other aside in a frantic scramble for survival, while Caligula lounged on a couch, laughing, feeding himself grapes. One senator, Lucius Vitellius, a decorated military commander, tore his expensive toga as he crawled. His knees bled, his dignity evaporated. And when he finally reached Caligula, trembling and breathless, the emperor let him kneel in silence for a long, humiliating moment. Then he pointed at his sandals. The prize for winning? Licking the emperor's feet. And Lucius did it, because the alternative was death.
Caligula knew exactly how far he could push Rome's elite before breaking them completely. And he delighted in keeping them right on the edge, alive, but destroyed inside. But the ritual that truly shattered them wasn't public. It was something far more intimate and infinitely more terrifying. It was called the Midnight Summons. At random, in the dead of night, Caligula's guards would bang on a senator's door. The man had minutes to dress and follow, uncertain whether he was being called for a feast, for humiliation, or for death. Sometimes he was forced to dine with the emperor while pretending to enjoy the evening. Other times, he was ushered into the emperor's bedroom, where Caligula lay with the senator's wife and the husband was forced to watch. And on the worst nights, Caligula said nothing at all. He simply stared at the senator in silence for hours, then dismissed him with a smile. One senator was summoned 7 times in a single month. By the end, he stopped sleeping altogether, living every night in dread of the knock. Caligula didn't need to execute his enemies. He hollowed them out from the inside. And just when Rome's elite thought they had seen every form of cruelty imaginable, Caligula revealed the deepest layer of his system. A system built not just on pain, but on participation. Because the final, most devastating ritual was this. He made everyone complicit. No senator could report the atrocities without condemning himself. No wife could speak of her humiliation without risking execution. No father could expose the horrors done to his daughter without exposing his own silence.
Caligula didn't just break Rome's ruling class, he made them accessories to their own destruction. And now that we've walked through the first half of Caligula's labyrinth, brace yourself. The next chapters reveal how his reign spiraled into something even more horrific. Rituals so disturbing that even ancient historians refuse to record the full details.
To understand the next stage of Caligula's descent, you have to imagine Rome as a city drowning in fear. Senators walked through marble halls like ghosts, breathing, speaking, pretending. But inside, they were hollowed out. Yet even then, even after shattering the sanctity of families, destroying reputations, and forcing Rome's elite to crawl at his feet, Caligula wasn't done. His next obsession would twist religion itself into a spectacle of degradation. When Caligula declared himself a living god, Rome didn't fully grasp what that meant. Plenty of emperors had encouraged worship. Plenty had statues or temples. But Caligula didn't want reverence. He wanted intimacy. He wanted Rome not just to bow, but to degrade itself publicly in his name. So he built a temple on the Palatine Hill, gleaming with white marble and gold. But what truly set it apart wasn't the architecture. It was the priesthood. Because in a move that stunned even those accustomed to his madness, Caligula declared that the wives of senators would now serve as his sacred priestesses. These were women who had once hosted salons, attended political ceremonies, and influenced policy through their families. Overnight, they were transformed into instruments of worship, under the control of a man who viewed humiliation as a political tool. Ancient accounts describe rituals inside the temple that blurred the line between religion and perversion. Men who donated lavishly to Caligula received sacred privileges, which meant private time with these priestesses under the emperor's watchful eye. It was not framed as corruption. It was framed as divine service. Anyone who refused to participate risked being charged with sacrilege, one of the few crimes punishable by immediate execution. Caligula had found a loophole. He wasn't forcing women into prostitution, he was forcing them into worship. And in Rome, disobeying the gods was a far greater sin than disobeying the emperor. But his hunger for humiliation stretched beyond the temple. The arena, the place Romans celebrated bravery and survival, became another of his grotesque playgrounds. Suetonius recounts that Caligula took personal delight in transforming senators, the supposed pillars of Roman dignity, into gladiators. It wasn't enough to strip them of their influence. He wanted to strip them of their humanity. And he designed these spectacles like a choreographer of nightmares. He chose the weapons. He designed the matchups. He selected which wives and daughters would sit in the front row. The message was always the same. If your husband or father displeases me, you will watch him die. One story in particular reveals how deeply Caligula understood the psychology of terror. A senator named Quintus Pomponius was chosen to fight a starving leopard with nothing but a wooden club. His wife Julia, heavily pregnant, was forced to sit front and center. Every time she flinched, guards stood behind her, ready to drag her into the arena. The entire fight lasted 11 agonizing minutes. When the leopard tore out Quintus's throat, Julia collapsed. She gave birth prematurely that night. Both she and the child died. Caligula didn't express sorrow. He didn't even attend the funeral. Instead, he seized their property before dawn. To him, grief wasn't a tragedy, it was leverage. Yet even these horrors weren't enough to satisfy the emperor's appetite for orchestrated suffering. Because Caligula believed Roman power was most effective when exercised unpredictably. And so he invented a ritual equal parts psychological torture
and twisted game show. The senators called it the crawling command. The setup was simple: a lavish banquet, wine, meat, dancers, musicians. And at the height of the evening, when everyone was at ease, Caligula would clap his hands. Instantly, the room froze. Guards sealed the doors. Then came the order: crawl. Every senator, old, young, decorated general, or newly appointed bureaucrat, had to drop to all fours and scramble across the marble floor to reach the emperor's feet. The last one there was executed on the spot. Imagine the scene. Dozens of Rome's most powerful men who would once commanded armies, reduced to panting, scrambling animals, tearing their soaks and smashing their knees as they fought to avoid being last. One account describes Senator Lucius Vitellius, a man who had led legions in Germania. His toga ripped, blood smeared across the floor from his knees. His breath came in ragged gasps. And when he finally reached the emperor, Caligula didn't even look at him. He made the senator kneel for several minutes before offering him the prize: the honor of licking the emperor's sandals. Vitellius did it, not because he lacked pride, but because he had grandchildren. Because Caligula had forced him into a choice between dignity and extinction. And Caligula wasn't done inventing new ways to break the human psyche. Among all his rituals, the midnight summons stands out as perhaps the most psychologically devastating. It happened like this. Guards would bang on a senator's door in the dead of night. The man had minutes, sometimes seconds, to get dressed and follow. No explanation, no clue whether he was being summoned for execution, entertainment, or humiliation. Sometimes he was brought to a banquet and expected to laugh and drink as if nothing was wrong. Sometimes he was led into Caligula's bedroom, where he found the emperor lying with his wife, forcing him to watch. And sometimes the emperor simply stared at him for hours in silence and then dismissed him with no explanation. One senator endured 7 midnight summonses in a single month. By the end, he no longer slept. He sat upright every night, fully clothed, waiting for the knock. That was the real point. Caligula didn't need to wield a sword. He didn't need mass executions. He needed fear. Deep, gnawing fear that destroyed a man long before death ever came. And then Caligula struck a blow so deeply psychological, so insidious that historians still struggle to categorize it. He made every senator complicit. Because in his system, if you witnessed a violation and stayed silent, you were guilty. If you watched an auction and didn't bid, you insulted the emperor. If you refused temple rituals, you committed sacrilege. If you attended his games, you validated his cruelty. There was no way to escape guilt. Caligula transformed Rome's elite into unwilling participants in their own degradation. Even after his death, they couldn't expose him without exposing themselves. This was his masterpiece, a regime built not merely on fear, but on shared shame. And just when historians believe these horrors were exaggerations, political smears, myths, theatrical retellings, something happened that changed everything. In 1987, archaeologists excavating beneath the Palatine Hill discovered a hidden chamber. A cold, narrow stone room. On its walls, carved carefully into marble, were 23 names. Beside each name was a date, and beneath each date, the same haunting phrase etched in Latin: Silentium mors est. Silence is death. They were the names of senators' wives, women Caligula had publicly violated. Carved not by historians, not by priests, but by the women themselves, desperate to leave behind a record of what had been done to them. A whisper from 2,000 years ago, refusing to be buried. Lead archaeologist Marco Bellini said something chilling as he examined the inscriptions. Quote, "Ancient writers softened the truth. They could not bear to record the full reality." End quote. Caligula's world wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a myth. It was real, etched into stone by the hands of the broken. And now that we understand how he wielded power, we can finally confront the most devastating truth he revealed about humanity. That absolute power doesn't just corrupt, it deforms, it twists, it perverts. Caligula didn't create evil. He revealed how easily it thrives in silence.
By the 4th year of Caligula's reign, Rome had turned into a city of whispers. Not the ordinary gossip of citizens, but the hushed murmurs of a society suffocating under psychological domination. The emperor's rituals had left scars on every powerful family in the empire, and yet, almost no one dared to stand against him. Why? Because Caligula perfected something that even modern tyrants struggle to achieve. A system so entangled in shame that rebellion felt suicidal. Every senator, every noble family, every influential figure had become complicit, even if unwillingly. They were chained by their own silence. But the emperor made a fatal mistake. He believed he was invincible. As Caligula's rituals grew increasingly erratic, his inner circle, the very guards meant to protect him, began to feel the tremors of instability. The senators were broken, but the Praetorian Guard, they were different. They were soldiers. They weren't bred for politics or honor. They were bred for survival. And Caligula crossed a line even they could not tolerate. He began humiliating the guards, not just the senators, mocking them in public, assigning impossible tasks, threatening their families, and worst of all, treating them as disposable playthings in the same way he treated Rome's elite. A tyrant can break politicians. He can crush noble families. But when he turns on the men with swords, the clock starts ticking. The rumor that finally ignited the conspiracy came from within the palace. Caligula planned to replace the Praetorian Guard entirely with foreign mercenaries. The Guard knew exactly what that meant. Once replaced, they would be executed to erase witnesses to his reign. Survival demanded action. The plot coalesced quickly. Trusted officers, palace insiders, and even a few senators whispered in secret corridors. The pain Caligula inflicted had forged something he had never anticipated: unity. On January 24th, 41 CE, Caligula attended a theatrical performance in one of the palace courtyards. He laughed. He shouted. He mocked actors. He ridiculed senators in attendance. And then, he began throwing food into the audience like a spoiled child. When he left the theater through a narrow passageway, only a handful of guards followed. More guards drifted in behind him. At first, Caligula barely noticed. Why would he? The palace was his cage of obedience. But as the passageway tightened, the guards drew their blades. The attack was swift, brutal, overwhelming. A dozen men stabbed him repeatedly. Caligula screamed, not in fear, but in disbelief. His mind simply could not fathom that anyone would dare to touch a living god. Within seconds, the emperor collapsed. Blood soaked the marble floor. His final moments were not marked by ceremony, but by the terrified realization that power, real power, rested not in fear or shame, but in the steel of the men beside him. His wife was killed, his daughter assassinated, his legacy shattered. Rome didn't mourn him. Rome exhaled. But here's the chilling truth.
While Caligula died, his system he created didn't. Because the rituals he crafted weren't random cruelties. They were a blueprint, a demonstration of how easily human beings can be manipulated when honor becomes a weapon, when shame becomes a cage, when silence becomes survival. Caligula proved something terrifying that echoes through centuries. A tyrant doesn't need loyalty. He only needs fear. And he doesn't need to kill everyone. He just needs everyone to believe they might be next. Seneca, who lived through the reign, captured this truth with brutal clarity. The tyrant's power is not in the death he gives, but in the fear he inspires. And Rome would never be the same again. Even after his assassination, the empire struggled to cleanse itself of the stain he left behind. Senators destroyed records. Families rewrote histories. Temples were purified. The palace was remodeled. Caligula's name was struck from inscriptions. Rome didn't just want him dead. Rome wanted him forgotten. But the past has a way of surviving. Centuries later, fragments of testimony resurfaced. Papyrus, stone inscriptions, private letters, hidden rooms. And with each discovery, historians realized that ancient writers didn't exaggerate Caligula. They softened him. Because some horrors are simply too dark to record in full. And so we remember him not because Rome wanted us to, but because the victims he tried to erase refused to disappear. Caligula ruled for 4 short, catastrophic years. In that time, he destroyed more than 200 families, turned the palace into a theater of humiliation, shattered Rome's honor system, weaponized religion, manipulated shame, and created rituals so perverse they echo into modern psychology textbooks. When he died, Rome tried to rebuild, but the scars remained. Because Caligula didn't just change politics, he changed people. He showed how quickly society can be bent, twisted, and broken when one man holds unlimited power. And 2,000 years later, his legacy still matters. Not because he was the cruelest emperor, though he might have been. Not because he was the most depraved, though history makes a strong case. But because he revealed the darkest truth about humanity. That the silence of good people can be the most powerful weapon a tyrant possesses. Remember that hidden chamber beneath the Palatine Hill. Remember the names carved into stone by trembling hands. Remember the phrase they left behind. Silentium mors est. Silence is death. Those women carved their truth into marble because they knew Rome would try to erase them. Yet across 2 millennia, their voices survived. And now, you've heard them. This is the story most history books refuse to tell. The story of a man who turned power into torment, pleasure into punishment, and honor into a trap with no escape.